Hey everybody, Kenny here. Before we get started, I'm just including this little disclaimer that I will be using at the start of each of my Diablo 4 planning videos. Initially, I was going to create one long video that I was just going to add timestamps for, but when I did that with my Octopath Traveler 2 video, despite the fact that it is one of my more successful videos on my channel, I think from the analytics that I saw in that video that the length may have been a little intimidating, which caused it to not get as much traction as it probably would have if I had just released a bunch of shorter videos that each showcased a different character. So instead of doing one long video, I'm doing a bunch of shorter videos on all of my tips and my build planning that I will be putting into a playlist, and then each of these videos will just kind of refer back using this disclaimer here, just to set expectations of what's going to be coming here. These are all going to be essentially theory videos, while most of this has practical application already known due to all of the data mining on the available build calculators and practical experience from playing through the various beta events, as well as what we know from other YouTube groups. Everything here is still potentially going to change once the game actually comes out. We don't know for certain what's going to be what. We just know what we've seen and what's available to us to see. So take everything that you see in any of these videos with a grain of salt. So with that out of the way, let's get going. So this time we're going to be going over my Necromancer build that I plan to do after I've done at least Act 1 with my Druid. So the basis of the Necromancer that I'm going for, and actually the only reason I'm even playing a Necromancer, is that a couple weeks ago I had read the first book in the lit RPG series He Who Fights Monsters. And in that book, it has quite possibly like one of my favorite protagonists that I've ever experienced in any of these types of books, named Jason Asano. And I'm sure that, anyone who saw the thumbnail for this video and was aware of this series probably already knew what the idea was that I'm going for here. Because Jason Asano is a character who is actually like a very positive and upbeat character, despite the fact that all of his magical abilities are just super evil. Like the most stereotypical evil powers someone could have, he has. But he's but he's not the villain. He's actually like a good guy working as a hero, adventuring around, doing good guy things. But as I was looking through the Necromancer skill tree after having read that book, I realized that this is a perfect opportunity to emulate that character in a video game form, because the Necromancer in this game actually has a lot in common with the skill set of that character. So the basis kind of with him is that he does essentially like necrotic damage, you could say. Like he's a how's the book put it? He's an affliction specialist. And with that said, you'd think that I'd be going for hemorrhage for the bleed, but I am not. I'm actually going all dark with this. And the reason for that is that another part of his skill set is that Jason Asano is trained in the I don't remember the full name, but it's like the something Reaper fighting style. Obviously, Reap is probably a good starting point for a character like that. So my goal is that I will be starting off investing in Reap and getting enhanced Reap. Make it that if an enemy dies within 2 seconds, you gain extra attack speed. Then when we get into the core here, we're going into Sever. Just fully investing in the whole Reaper fighting style. So with Sever, like you send out a Spectre that lunges forward and deals damage going out and coming back in. We're getting enhanced Sever for the increased damage against enemies along the path. And make it that every 4th cast of Sever makes enemies vulnerable. Then back here at Reap, we're going to grab Acolyte's Reap, which makes it that Reap forms a corpse under the first enemy hit. And even though it can only happen every 5 seconds, it's a guaranteed corpse that you get just from using your basic skill, which gives us access to Macabre down here. And of course, we're going to be investing in Corpse Explosion. So, Corpse Explosion, as the name suggests, you detonate corpses, dealing damage to surrounding enemies. And we'll be getting the Enhanced Corpse Explosion upgrade, which increases the radius. And since the whole idea is that this is an Affliction Specialist, we will be getting the Blighted Corpse Explosion upgrade, which makes it that Corpse Explosion becomes a Darkness skill, and instead of exploding, it releases a Vile Miasma, dealing shadow damage over time. Perfect for our theme. Back in the core area, then start investing in Hued Flesh, which makes it that our lucky hits have a chance to create a corpse at a target location. With 2 points in, that's 8% chance with a lucky hit. Down here in the corruption area, we will not be grabbing either of the curses. Nope. Curses are not part of this build. That said, we will be taking Death's Embrace here, which makes it that enemies take increased damage if they're close to us and deal less damage for the same reason. So just additional 6% damage to close enemies, and you take less damage from close enemies, which is a no-brainer there. And we'll finish up our Hued Flesh, invest some in Sever until we unlock Summoning down here. Now in Summoning, once again, we will not be taking any of these. No Corpse Tendril, no Bone Spirit. What we will be taking from here though is Necrotic Carapace, which makes it that if a corpse is formed from our skills or our minions, then we fortify for 2% of our base life. Fully invest in that so that we fortify for 6%. And our goal is to be kind of creating corpses as often as possible. So this is definitely going to come into play. This is a this is a build planning thing. So we actually don't know if that's going to come into play. We hope it's going to come into play. I did play as a Necromancer during the beta, but I focused on, I think, the blood skills. I actually don't recall. No, I only got my Necromancer to like level 12 or something. So I can't say for sure, but like I know that I wasn't using the darkness stuff in the beta, but I hope that this will work. Once we have that, we'll go and start investing more into Sever. And once that's capped out, then we'll go and start putting 1 point into Unliving Energy, which will then give us access to the Ultimate tier. And from the Ultimate tier, we actually are taking a skill. We're going to be taking Army of the Dead. And the reason we're taking Army of the Dead is because the first upgrade, and that's the only upgrade we're taking for this, makes it that when the volatile skeletons that are summoned and explode perform their suicide maneuver, they have a chance to leave behind a corpse, which is very good for us. And we're going to start investing in Standalone here, which gives us a damage reduction based on how many minions we have. The more minions we have, the less damage reduction we get. And the reason for that is because we're going to be investing in Memento Mori, which means that if we sacrifice both our Skeletal Warriors and Skeleton Mages, we increase their sacrifice bonus by 20%. all the way up to 60%. Now what that means is that the Necromancer has this system here, the Book of the Dead. And in their Book of the Dead, they have skeletal warriors, skeletal mages, and golems. The skeletal warriors have 3 variations, as do the skeletal mages, as do the golems. If you choose to sacrifice instead of using them in an active form, then you get a passive benefit for that. And this is the reason why I don't have any real skills in this build. Why it's just Reap, Sever, Perfect Explosion, and Army of the Dead. Because I believe that you do still need to have the skeletal warriors and the skeletal mages on your bar. Now maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not how it works. Maybe like if you're sacrificing, then they don't need to be on your bar and you actually do have available active slots for skills. But I don't think that's the case, and that's the reason why I didn't take any other skills for this build. So from Skeletal Warriors, I will be going to Skeletal Reapers. And the reason for Skeletal Reapers is that when you sacrifice them, you deal increased shadow damage, which is obviously beneficial to our specific build. Then from Skeletal Mages, you'll be sacrificing the Shadow Mages. However, ironically, the Shadow Mages do not give you further increased shadow damage if you sacrifice them. Instead, they give you increased essence, which is our resource as a Necromancer. The goal is to sacrifice both to get the benefit of Memento Mori here, which makes it that their sacrifice bonus is increased by 60%, so that Skeletal Reaper sacrifice bonus increases to 24%, or 24% multiplier, and the Shadow Mage's bonus increases to 24 additional essence. And with that, we'll put a point into Corpse Explosion, one more for good measure, and now we have access to our key passives. And of course, in here, we're going to be going for Shadow Blight. And with Shadow Blight, if you deal shadow damage, it infects enemies with Shadow Blight, and any damage you deal to those enemies will be increased for that period, and every 10th time the enemy receives shadow damage while affected by Shadow Blight, they'll take an additional 20% shadow damage. And at this point, just like with my Druid build, this is when the experimentation will start. And I'll mess around with Shadow Blight for a little bit. If I like it, then I will start dropping all of the skills, completely refunding everything, trying out every possible combination of skills to see if there's anything I like more than the Shadow build that I'm going for to make this character emulate the character of Jason Asano. Also I don't think I can fit it in, depending if whether I have to have these on the bar. If I do have to have these on the bar, because that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 skills, meaning that's all of our skill slots taken. Assuming that we have to keep our sacrifices on our skill bar. If that ends up not being the case, and you can gain the benefits of your sacrifices without having them on the skill bar, then as a further thematic choice, I guess, for this character, I would be getting the Blood Golem, sorry. And the reason I'd be getting the Blood Golem is that the character Jason Asano, I'm not going to explain what the thing is, but he has a pet. And Jason Asano's pet is a writhing mound of blood leeches. And so a Blood Golem would obviously be quite in theme. So if I could fit it in, I would be taking this. But as I said, when I reach this point in my leveling journey, this is when experimentation begins, and depending on how things go, we may not be moving any further with the Jason Asano build and maybe moving on to something else entirely with my Necromancer character. But so this is the basic leveling setup that I'm going for. And assuming that all goes well, and this is a build that I want to keep pushing forward with, and I don't like anything from... I don't like any of the bone spells more, I don't like any of the blood skills more, I don't decide I want to be a full minion master, whole thing. Assuming all of that remains true, then this will be the finalized build. The full push as far as we can build. And so what additions we'd be doing in the skill tree is capping out Reap, we'd already have capped out Sever. Capped out Reap, capped out Imperfectly Balanced, which gives us more damage at the cost of increased essence, which is why we wanted to get the Shadow Mage Sacrifice, and capping out Unliving Essence to just get us to a full 33 additional essence. Of course, capping out our Corpse Explosion, since that plays a major role in our entire build. Capping out Grim Harvest, so that when we consume our corpses, which means when we cast Corpse Explosion, we generate additional essence, and we deal additional damage anytime we consume a corpse. And we put 1 point into Spiked Armor for a little bit of Thorns. We'll also be going into Reaper's Pursuit to make it that damaging enemies with darkness skills increases our movement speed. And Gloom, which makes it that when enemies are damaged by our darkness skills, they take increased shadow damage, and it's a stacking damage multiplier. And of course, we'll be capping out Standalone and Memento Mori for those bonuses we mentioned. And that's essentially it for our skill build. And as I mentioned, assuming that we're able to do these without having to occupy any skill slots, we would be getting our Blood Golem and adding that to our build. Now into the pie in the sky part of this build. Yes, I'm going to keep using that term. So the idea here, we want to be making our way, just like with our druid. We want to be grabbing all of our magic and rare nodes to get all of the extra resistances and life and damage. Heading up through here, most likely up this way. Like the glyphs, once again, we don't know, will I be able to get a glyph? Maybe, maybe not. I just don't know. I want to be able to get the exploit glyph. If I can't, then I'd just be passing through. If I am able to get it, then I would like to get the exploit glyph, because it makes it that if we grab all of the dexterity in the area, then we deal additional damage to vulnerable enemies. And we are making enemies vulnerable by using our Sever, thanks to our upgrade here. And as I mentioned in all of my Diablo 4 related videos so far, the reason for something like this is because this is a bucket right here. This is damage to vulnerable enemies, vulnerable targets. So right there we have a damage bucket for 2 vulnerable. Assuming, once again, we're able to actually get this. Then we have some more armor upgrades and damage upgrades here. But the board that we'd be moving into from the starting board would be Scent of Death. And inside of Scent of Death, the legendary node makes it that if there are at least 2 corpses nearby, then we gain damage reduction. If there are no corpses nearby, then we deal increased damage. So basically, like, we're in a constant state of being more tanky and dealing more damage. Kind of like a pendulum, which once again is like super thematic for this character. Out of here, we're able to get some additional shadow resilience and also some more life. This is actually a pretty big one, because from what they said in the developer blogs, I guess, when they would, like answer questions from the community and stuff, they did mention that shadow resistance was not going to be easy to come by. So I figured, it's a good idea to have at least a way to fully invest in shadow resistance as much as I can. We also get another entry into our 2 bucket here, because in this section we're able to get increased damage against healthy enemies. And then in this section here, we get the same benefit but to injured enemies. So if enemies have above 80% health, we have a 2 bucket for them. If enemies are below, I'm not sure if injured counts as below 20%, below 30%, below 40%, or below 50%. But I'm sure one of those is the case. But so somewhere below 50%. We have another 2 bucket there. For our pie in the sky choice here, if we can get Scourge, then that would make it that we deal increased damage, shadow damage over time, based on the amount of willpower we have purchased in that range. And if we're able to satisfy our glyph requirements, then we'll deal an additional 10% damage multiplier against enemies that are affected by shadow damage over time effects. And because of the way that our Corpse Explosion works, enemies should always be suffering from damage over time, shadow damage over time from us. And from this board, we'll be moving into the Wither board. And from the Wither board, we get some additional damage reduction from enemies that are suffering from shadow damage over time, which once again, enemies should always be suffering from shadow damage over time from us. That's what we're set up to do. We're getting ourselves some nice extra shadow resistance, as well as increased damage reduction against the enemies that are affected by the thing we're doing all the time. And right here, dragging shadows, we get an even bigger bonus to our damage reduction, as well as completing our bonus to turn that from a 4% into an 8% damage reduction from enemies that are taking shadow damage over time. And which is why I'm only, just as I mentioned in my build mechanics video, I'm only doing 2 boards per character, well, 2 additional boards per character, which is very different from what everyone else is doing. But I'm doing it this way because this makes it that in the situation that, because like I said, we don't know how it works yet, but in the situation that the stat requirements for satisfying the rare nodes is only based on the stats you have in your build and not the stats you have from your gear, then I just wanted to make sure that I'm able to get the rare node bonuses that I want out of each of my builds. So that's why I limit myself to 2, so that way I can just go and fill these in as much as possible to get the big bonuses that I want. So I guarantee that I'm able to get that additional 4% damage reduction from enemies that are taking damage over time, shadow damage over time. In this one over here is making it that we're dealing more damage to enemies taking shadow damage over time. Another entry into our 2 bucket. And the legendary node here is Wither, which makes it that our shadow damage over time effects have a 5% chance to deal a 50% multiplier each time they deal damage. The chance is increased based on the amount of willpower we have. Well, both the chance and the damage are increased based on the amount of willpower we have. So right here, we have 364 willpower. We'd have an additional 7% chance, so 12% chance to have our shadow damage over time effects deal an additional 62.5% bonus damage, 62.5% damage multiplier. And our final pie in the sky here is, if we can get it, we want Undaunted, which makes it that we deal increased damage while fortified. So we have the while damage bucket. wrapped into our damage numbers. So with that, we would have 2 bucket, wild bucket, vulnerable bucket, our main stat bucket, and the all damage bucket. So that's basically all of the buckets except for, I don't remember what the last bucket is, but that's almost all the buckets. So this would be a very high damage build. It's also set up to be quite tanky, especially if we're able to fit our golem in. Because if we can fit the golem in, then I would be taking the Blood Golem upgrade 1, which makes it that our golem absorbs 50% of damage that we would take. And with all of our other courses of damage reduction, our Jason Asano should do pretty well. Yep, so that is my and Necromancer build. Hopefully it works out, but we will see. This is the build that I'm most curious in seeing how it'll fare, which is the reason why I'm going to be doing this one immediately after my Druid. And then after that, I'm very curious to see how my Sorcerer build is going to do, so that's why that's coming up right after this. And then my Barbarian, which is a build that I know is going to be, it's not on the list of builds that people are talking about right now, but I guarantee you that build is going to be good. And then my Rogue build is the last one, and the reason it's the last one is that, we already know that Rogues are basically the highest damage dealing class in the game. So it's actually it's boring to even consider playing a Rogue right now. So that's why I'm the least interested in playing as that character. I'm much more interested in doing the other 4 first. With that said, the link to this build will be in the description. So if you're curious, you can check it out there. If you found this video helpful, then I appreciate doing all the YouTube stuff. Like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, stay Victus, Virus and Numeris, and bye.